In this webcast, we'll be looking at Grace's letter, which is 15 pages, to the ABWE board, dated February 11th, 2013. Now, I'm not going to read all of what they've sent to them, but portions that I found important, and you can read these at Grace's website, netgrace.org. This is page 1, paragraph 1. Dear Dr. Cockrell, he's the gentleman that took Michael Loftus's position. They're still looking for a president. The letter goes on, this first paragraph on page 1. We are deeply saddened by ABWE's decision to terminate our engagement agreement only a few weeks from the issuance of our final report. Now, I will stress certain words in here because I think they are important. ABWE terminated this agreement only a few weeks from the issuance of the final report. As you know, many MKs and their families have been waiting for a decade to have an independent investigation of Ketcham and ABWE's handling of this matter. We suspect that for many of these individuals, your decision will inflict a pain as great as any they have ever known. This is also page 1, last 2 paragraphs, and I quote, in addition to responding to the alleged investigative flaws, it is important to recount ABWE's repeated failures to comply with the contractual obligations to Grace. These contractual breaches included repeated objections to providing requested documents and the failure to provide such documents in a timely manner, if at all. ABWE further breached the contract by failing to provide Grace with access to critical witnesses associated with your organization. ABWE's contractual breaches needlessly delayed this investigation and impaired our ability to fully evaluate ABWE's response to the crimes perpetrated by Don Ketcham. When placed in the context of ABWE's conduct over the past 20 months, the termination of Grace strongly suggests ABWE is unwilling to have itself investigated unless the investigation is within your control. We pray that is not the case. End of quote. On page 4, last paragraph of this page, it goes over onto page 5, and I quote, ABWE's response to the 1989 allegations against Ketcham was to conduct a very limited investigation and to directly and indirectly instruct those on the field not to speak about Don Ketcham's acts of child molestation. They requested them not to speak about it. If ABWE had encouraged open dialogue and invited parents and others to share concerns, it is possible that the additional allegations of abuse related to Don Ketcham would have surfaced years earlier. Indeed, it was at a 2002 MK reunion that alleged victims began to speak about the abuse and to realize that each of them was not alone in their experiences with Don Ketcham. In other words, it was only when alleged victims were able to communicate with each other that concerns about abuse crystallized. Now, that's important to understand here, that in their limited investigation in 1989, and to directly and indirectly instruct those on the field not to speak about Don Ketcham's acts of child molestation. Can you imagine your child being molested by a medical doctor, a missionary, and instructed by the mission under which you served not to speak about it? I don't know how they got people to obey such rules. This is page 9, last full paragraph, and I quote, Grace is aware of several key witnesses previously employed or engaged with ABWE who have been uncooperative and have declined to answer even written questions, claiming Grace is biased. In the course of the investigation, Grace also encountered witnesses who were strongly supportive of Don Ketcham, or ABWE, and expressed concern that we ask direct and focused questions. Again, none of this is unusual in a child abuse investigation or an investigation of a religious institution that has strong, and I emphasize strong, allegiance. End of quote. Now on page 11, first paragraph, and I quote, "Moreover, it is critical to keep in mind that this investigation is not simply about Don Ketcham's alleged acts of sexual abuse. Although there remains an issue as to how many children Don Ketcham sexually victimized, there is no dispute he molested at least one child. Indeed, he confessed to this conduct, and ABWE dismissed him for it. The broader issue is how ABWE responded to this allegation. In other words, who at ABWE had knowledge about Ketcham's conduct and what actions, appropriate or inappropriate, were taken by ABWE. The response by ABWE to the abuse perpetrated by Don Ketcham was one of the primary issues that we were asked to investigate." End of quote. Page 11, second paragraph, and I quote, "By rigidly insisting on a court standard, as opposed to an investigative standard for making findings, ABWE is purposely or unwittingly insulating itself from clear findings of sexual abuse or other wrongdoings in those cases that were not timely or thoroughly investigated by ABWE. This is because the longer an institution waits to fully assess a case of abuse, the greater the likelihood that witnesses become unavailable, have imperfect memories, and critical corroborating evidence is lost." End of quote. Page 13, the last paragraph, and I quote, "On more than one occasion, Grace provided ABWE with a detailed list of documents received, not received, or that were incomplete. As of this writing," and this letter was the 11th of February, 2013, "Grace is still missing documents, or other information requested. Not only is this failure a material breach of our contract, it has unnecessarily delayed the investigation. When we began this investigation, we told ABWE we anticipated the process would take approximately 18 months. The investigation has taken longer in no small part to ABWE's failure to provide documents for months at a time, if at all." On page 14, first and second paragraph, and I quote, "These repeated breaches gave Grace grounds for terminating our investigation. These breaches prompted us to inquire on more than one occasion whether ABWE really wanted to complete this process. Each time we were assured that you did. Despite the obstacles ABWE has repeatedly placed in the way of this investigation, Grace has persisted in completing this work because so many are dependent on it. As noted at the beginning of this letter, many of these MKs and their families have waited more than 10 years for ABWE to conduct a complete and fair investigation into the Ketcham matter, as well as ABWE's handling of the case." End of quote. Now the second paragraph, and I quote, "Accordingly, we were prepared to issue a final report based on the findings of this investigation, and had recently informed you that the report would be delivered no later than the end of March." That's March of 2013. ABWE dismissed them from this the 7th of February, if not before. This letter to ABWE is dated 11th February 2013. Going on with this quote, "We regret that that will never happen, and we fear that those whose lives have been sheared by their experiences on the field in Bangladesh may never know a true sense of relief from their pain this side of heaven. Now, what a disappointment. ABWE did not allow Grace to even give their final report. 1 month away, and ABWE bails out. Why did ABWE cease Grace's role in the investigation? Were they afraid of something else coming out? Now we know from reading on ABWE's website they give their reasons, but I ask, are these the real reasons? After all their cover-up, it is hard to accept the ones given on the site of ABWE. There was cover-up, self-preservation before the investigation, and to me it looks like ABWE is continuing to be in this self-preservation mode. The only reason ABWE has gone this far is because some girls were brave enough to stand up and to be counted. The ABWE board ought to wake up and see that dismissing Grace only throws more suspicion on ABWE. There is no transparency here, and it seems, at least for the time, there will be no closure for these girls or for others watching from outside.